a public hearing will then be opened. Anyone who wishes to address the board will come forward, sign in, and state their name and address, which will be made part of the permanent record. Each person will be allowed to speak for 5 minutes. In addition, each person will be allowed to address the board only once unless they have new and pertinent information to share. The public hearing will then be closed. Any correspondence received regarding the case at hand will be presented to the board. The board will then enter into discussion. All motions will be made in the positive to avoid confusion. This does not necessarily mean the person making the motion is in favor of the request. It will take 3 positive votes to approve a request. Any request which is denied shall not be brought back to our board for a period of 1 year. The board reserves the right to ask questions of the appellant at any point throughout the hearing. We have a full board this evening, and so our case will be heard. Mr. Kinch, if you could please introduce the case to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This first case that we have this, I guess it's our only case we have here this evening. Is this mic on, Steve? Are you on? First case we have identified is case number 22-03. This is a case that's been filed by Andy Tyson of Konwinski Construction on behalf of the Broadway Family Dentistry. Broadway Family Dentistry is currently located at 611 East Broadway. They've purchased a property directly to the east, which is a residential structure listed as 617 East Broadway. They are looking for consideration under section 154.405A, which deals with the building entrance location for a commercial building in the CD4 district. The property was constructed, we presume, under a previous zoning ordinance, which allowed for a side entrance, which we're considering this request this evening. Is the entrance is required to be on the facade. We'll talk a little bit about those definitions here so it's clear on what we're considering here this evening. Future land use on this property is mixed use medium density. It does permit this type of use. We typically see the smaller building types, both residential and commercial, varying landscaping, far as setbacks and such to the public street, at the front property line rather. We also see varying types of building structures. All of the building types are permitted in this district. Land uses currently to the north, we have residential, which is zone CD3. We have some multifamily duplexes as well as single family dwellings. To the east, we have some residential structures, which is zone CD4. To the south and to the west, both zones CD4 with a mixture of commercial and residential uses. Pertinent sections that we're looking at this evening are under the standards under 154.405A. You'll see under subsection building standards to the right. Hopefully you can see this and follow along. Under the facade, and as you note here, under entrances, this says the main entrance must be in the facade of a principal frontage. If a shop front on a corner lot, then it gives us some other criteria that we can look at for placement of that entrance. But this is the pertinent section that we're looking at for some relief here to allow for the building at 617 to be raised and in addition be placed on the family dentistry directly to the east. So I put these in your report. There's a number of definitions that we'll look at tonight, but probably the most important is the facade and where we determine what area or what wall is regulated under the standards to the extent of not only the width, but openings, percent of window openings, as well as the placement of the main entrance. And so under facade, it says an exterior wall of a building that is set along the frontage line. Frontage line is important. It's an important definition that we'll look at here as well. Also under elevation, any wall that isn't considered a facade, which is the front wall that is running parallel with the principal frontage, is considered an elevation, and it is regulated a little bit differently. You can see here, and this is your zoning ordinance, 3, so anything that's fronting is close, it's the closest wall structure to the principal frontage is considered the facade. And as we define this, this is right out of the zoning ordinance as well. The principal frontage is made up of both the public and the private frontage. There's a little bit of both on this site. And the area that is being regulated under the facade is the area that is closest to that front property line. Okay. I have the site plans here for the applicant. I'll touch on a little bit of some of the information that we went over on the pre-application. We shared this requirement with them during the pre-app. As a result, they came back with some design changes, tried to accommodate some of these items in the zoning ordinance to make some improvements on it. We're still dealing with existing conditions, whereas the dentist office would still be in operation during this renovation. Moving that access to the front of the building caused a lot of changes to the interior where they may have to close the business down. And so one of the things they came back with was an improved entrance on the west side of the building, provided a covered walkway out to the public sidewalk to get us a better connection for pedestrians. And you'll see that in their drawings. Just another illustration of the area and how we define it. Private frontage, there's 2 to 3 feet, I believe, in front of that building. I think they had some landscaping, lawn areas that would be preserved or maintained throughout the development or improved after the addition put in place. And then, of course, the public frontage. And that's the area where the facade, we would normally expect on new construction, where our main entrance would be. You have this in your packet, which gives us a sense of where the existing building is, how it's made up. And they talk about in their application trying to preserve some of the privacy, also along with the maintaining access points into the building. They would add the vestibule there again to improve the entrance feature coming into the building off the west. And they would maintain their reception and some of the interior layout that's currently in place. And then, of course, the addition is here with their layout back to the east. Building type is considered commercial. Their design fits within that criteria with exception to the pedestrian access, which there again we're talking about this evening. You'll see the design features that were improved on the west side to make that connection to the public sidewalk. The covered walkway. And I'll let them talk a little bit more about building materials and design, but during the pre-application, we met with the Mr. Beebe, who did the site work, along with their architect, and then Mr. Tyson, who is the builder on this project. Existing conditions, fairly tight site. With the development, they're going to improve some of the parking features along the back side of the building as well. That's where we would expect to see on-site parking. The parking that is to the east would be maintained, and they would have some landscaping in there to provide some screening. Existing conditions back to the east, you'll see some mixed-use buildings along with some multifamily dwellings. And then this is the house. It's currently a rental property, I believe, and they would purchase this home. This home would be raised as part of the development, and then the improvements would take place on this lot. The two lots would eventually be combined in one on the assessment roll. And that concludes what I have to share with you this evening. Do I have any questions from the board at this time?
Yeah, I have one question, Brian, just I think for everybody's edification. Obviously, where the entrance is now was fine with the previous code. And I'm trying to understand why the new code would insist on a frontage, would insist on an entrance that would be, in this instance, fronting on Broadway when the parking and everything is on the side. I'm just kind of interested in the background that went into that change.
Yeah, part of this is trying to make it more of a pedestrian scale, bringing the entrance out, bringing the buildings closer to the public realm. And so that was one of the criteria that was put in. And you'll see that throughout the zoning ordinance where the placement of that entrance, whether it's a single family home. In fact, we're going to be looking at one in November, and it talks about the placement of that main entrance in relationship to that frontage line. And so while it feels like a change in the code, we've had that in previous standards, locations of entrances, placement, and how we orient buildings on the property. Infill lots are a little bit different than corner lots, but nevertheless, we've regulated them. The language in the code is a slight bit different. Like we talk about lot layers now, and in the past, we talked about setbacks. So some of those things, while they sound different and more complicated, we're running down a lot of the same things
Okay, thank you.
as we do our zoning review. So, okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Kinch? Okay, Mr. Thiessen, Mr. Beebe, whoever's here to present the case.
Sure.
The fee goes up, you know, when you're both.
Yeah, doubled it, yeah. The P takes it back and forth, you know how to run the rest of it if you need this.
The P takes it back and forth.
Yeah, previous.
Okay. And what
You want your
takes
slides
it
up
forward?
first? Just enter.
Okay. All right. Good evening. My name's Tim Beebe. I'm with Central Michigan Surveying Development here in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And this is,
Andy Tyson, Konwinski Construction.
we have the general contractor and the site engineer here for you to ask questions. Our architect unfortunately was not able to make it. He had a conflicting meeting tonight. And what we want to go through is just to kind of rehash some of the items that Brian talked about. And the private frontage and the public frontage, and we see that there's this 3-foot gap. When we met with city staff, and one of the best things that's happened over the years is we've had this pre-application meeting that we go through. And each department gets to let us know. We bring in a conceptual and they let us know what the issues are going to be. Main issue that came out was that specifically in the ordinance, it says that entrance must be on the facade. So we talked about that and we said, well, can we put a false door in? Can we make it look like that? Well, why would you want to do that? Well, we have to have a controlled access point. This is a medical office. They have to check in. They can't get back to where other patients are. We have to keep them where they are. And oh, by the way, I want to run my business while you're doing the construction. Well, what do you mean? You're not going to move out? So we had to try and figure out a way to keep the parking lot functioning, keep the access functioning, keep her business functioning, and be able to turn this guy loose so that he can build that next portion of the building so that she can move then into the back portion of the building so that she can have the front part facelift. Because there will be some work in that existing area. You're not going to have a brand new building in the back and walk through the tired front. So, but we've got to keep her in business and we've got to keep that access restricted. And so there was a lot of brainstorming trying to go on what we could do and how we could do that. And what we came up with was, that shows it the best. This entryway bump out was placed so that the doorway, instead of coming out directly to the west, actually comes out to the north, which is to the front south. I'm sorry, to the south towards Broadway, which is that front-facing street. But it's supposed to be within that green area. We couldn't get that, but we could add on to the building and bring an access way up to that same point, giving the best feel that we could give to try and meet the requirements of the ordinance without having to change the interior of that building and move access points. So we brought it to Brian. Brian said, looks like a good compromise, but you're going to have to go to the ZBA because I can't make this ruling. He said, I know the intent, but short of building another building right next to it and bringing it out all the way, basically enclosing that, I can't say that that's a building. That's a walkway. That's a porch. So it has to come to the ZBA. So what we're hoping is that you take a look at what we're proposing. We have a parking lot existing. We're expanding off the backside. The backside is primarily going to be for the employees, and you'll see an employee access point in the back. The patient parking is going to be on that west side, which normally they would have gotten out of their car, walked directly in. The only thing that they'll have to do different is step to the side and come in and around. We're supposed to make the site pedestrian friendly. So we're bringing that access all the way out to the street line so that anyone that's coming or using street parking can get onto the sidewalk, come down, go under the canopy and come in. So the challenges that make it unique, it's an existing building, existing parking lot system, existing business that still needs to run. And we're adding all the new building to the back, which is all patient area, not the entrance portion. So.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
As Tim mentioned, there was an original concept intending to try and utilize as much of the existing building that was in place for obvious reasons. If we can utilize it and not have to modify it, it would be beneficial to our client while they maintain operations, but also just in general to not have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. As Brian mentioned in his presentation, the entrance had been built that way in a previous rendition of the ordinance, assuming to have been in compliance at the time. So what we did was at the time of the pre-app, as Tim mentioned, we put this addition on, projecting out to the west. Our client is very interested in maintaining pedestrian-friendly entrance and accommodating people who are both walking and potentially biking. If you look at our plan in a different view, the floor plan, you'll see that we have a patio area out back with some green space, and that's where our bike rack will go. So the intent is to make that a welcoming area. While staff may park there, we're still trying to accommodate the folks that are on bikes and potentially walking. Although sometimes you come out of the dentist office, I think you're gonna need a ride, right? So I think a lot of folks coming out of the dentist office may actually be jumping in a vehicle to the adjacent parking lot. So we recognized the issue once it was brought to us, and then made that addition and extended the covered canopy in an attempt to really capture the intent of the ordinance, right? I mean, that was what we were trying to do. So we have made some concessions already. I would encourage you to look at the criteria that you have in front of you to consider. The conditions of this property are existing and not the fault of the owner. That right there jumps out at me as a potential hook to hang our hat on, so to speak. But you're welcome to ask any questions you have. We feel like this was our best attempt to accommodate the intent of the ordinance, and we think it will be a great addition to the neighborhood. So.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Thiessen or Mr. Beebe at this time?
Couple of comments and then a question. One comment is I do like, just for the symmetry of it, that you've got the actual point of entry facing Broadway. So that's, that's relates to the existing code.
To be honest, Peter, I tried hard to convince city staff that we were meeting the intent there with our entrance faces Broadway.
Right.
And that's why I think Brian spent so much time with the definitions.
Yeah.
Because I picked them apart, right? I was
Sure.
looking to try and capture that existing entrance as a plausible option, but.
Yeah, it doesn't per se meet it, but it's helping. It's nodding toward it. I see also that you've got what could be 3 emergency exits toward the back.
True.
So that's good with all the walls in here. The other question I have is, there had been some concern about this particular area of some ground contamination. Have you guys dealt with that at all?
No, we had
Yeah, there was an environmental assessment pursued at the time of the purchase of the property, and it came back clear.
Okay.
So we were still under that.
Okay. Yeah, the only reason I was asking if it was just the building per se, your client's building is fine, but since you're demoing that gray house, I just wondered if that had occurred at all. But if that's not an issue, fine.
when the contractors demo it if they run into asbestos and things of that sort. That has its own set of rules for demolition.
Yeah.
So if that's what perhaps you're thinking, that very well may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be dealing with the abatement of that building separately with its own demolition permit, and we would cross that.
I think that plume runs to the river, so it would go the other, it'd go to the
It
west.
does. I wasn't gonna go down that road, but that is in fact true.
It runs away from that
Runs away
property.
from that property. All right.
Yeah, we're on the right side of
On the right side of the runoff. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Thiessen and Mr. Beebe at this time? Thank you both.
Thanks. If anything else comes up, feel free to call us back up.
Since right now we have no other questions from the board, we are now opening the public hearing as it relates to this case. So if there is anyone who wishes to speak on this case, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. This includes people in our audience here as well as on Zoom. Do we have anyone on Zoom who wishes to speak?
We do not.
Okay. There is no one who would like to speak to this case. I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. Kinch, is there any correspondence you'd like to share regarding this case?
Yeah, you have correspondence here from the Department of Fire Safety that outlines some of the things that we chatted about during our pre-application, so the owner is aware of these things. Knox box, some of the process and so on, codes that we follow, processes for reviews, those types of things. And then you also have from our Department of Public Works, which includes our engineering staff, utility permits, some of the things that run with the site that they'll be concerned with for stormwater and those types of things that will have to be complied with, so, okay?
Brian, I know these are new forms. I think they're very helpful because we used to have those just slammed into a couple of paragraphs.
Exactly.
Sometimes it was hard to pull them out, so this is very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for the record, some of these you'll see that it failed. It's because we haven't submitted anything for review, so it is a little, I know it stands right out. It says, something, one of our line items hasn't complied, but it's just, we haven't submitted plans for review yet, so.
I like this form, but, and I'm sure that it will change, but the thing that stood out to me, aside from the glaring red veils,
Yes.
was contacts refused for Tim Beebe. And I mean, we've worked with him. He's come before our board more times than I can count. And I
Yes.
thought that doesn't sound like him, so I don't know if there should be different language there. I don't think that he would refuse to talk to somebody. So that, because that's what stood out to me. I'm like, okay, this can all be correct. Whoa, wait, why did he not talk to that was a red flag to me.
Sure, we'll chat with our Department of Fire folks about that as well, so.
Not to interrupt the correspondence, but the correspondence from engineering leads me to a question. I think probably Mr. Thiessen can best answer this. Engineering suggested considering constructing the Broadway entrance in a manner that it could be used as I guess what they said is Broadway entrance. I'm thinking Broadway facade, in a manner that it could be used as a front entrance in the future if the building ever changed use. Is that something you considered when creating the architect, and you considered when creating your plans for that front exterior wall? Yes, please.
I'm gonna look back if I can.
You can, yeah, it's a little front gable there is the area. I think if you hit a P or just the enter.
Okay.
There you go.
Can I get to my?
Just
floor
hit enter
plan?
now.
Okay. If you look at our floor plan, in the middle of the page, you see a dashed red line indicating separation between the existing building and the proposed addition. It's labeled Storage Room 123. We identified this initially at the pre-application meeting as a possible door location. When you look at how that would allow a person to walk into this facility, it puts them right in the middle of the patient area without having been checked in.
Right.
And so we did consider that a possibility. And I think I would say, unfortunately, I don't know that we feel an obligation to forecast what a future use might be and where someone's preferred entrance might be. But we wanted to try and tie our proposed solution in with what would be the front facade. And so I'm going to attempt to go back to this view. You see our proposed entrance has an alternate color board and bat material. We have mimicked that same design feature on that front entrance in that location. So while we won't actually be installing a door, I think we're trying to lead someone to that conclusion that if perhaps it changed in the future, that would be a logical location for that door.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Kinch. Let's
No,
go
that's-
back
that's fine.
to any other communication.
I think that's it, and those will run with our minutes. One thing I will share is that assuming they get a favorable approval this evening, this case would actually move into the planning commission for site plan approval, and then they would go through a separate review process for building permits, which would include some of the things that the fire department has outlined in their correspondence too. So, okay.
Let's discuss.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty clear project, so I think we probably move ahead to the findings of fact.
Let's move ahead to the findings of fact. All right, let's go through the findings of fact. Number one, that there are so our findings of fact, our applicant must show practical difficulty by demonstrating that all of the following conditions exist. Our first finding, that there are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question or to the intended use of the property that do not apply generally to other properties or classes or uses in the same zoning district. Exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions normally include exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a specific property on the effective date of this chapter, exceptional topographic conditions or other extraordinary situation on the land, building, or structure, or use or development of the property immediately adjoining the property in question. Comments on our finding number one?
Well, I think the fact that this has already been a long existing use, and for clients, the parking and the entrance, the west entrance, make perfect sense. So I think the old use, the use under previous codes, has established a good basis for an approval in this particular case.
I agree. I think it falls under 1B very well.
I would add to that every building on that block exits to the side and not to the front, or doesn't have a front entrance. Every single building along that block goes to the side.
That is also a really good point. All of them predate our current code, and as such, had different criteria. Number two, that a variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of a substantial property right possessed by other properties in the same zoning district and in the vicinity. I think Commissioner McGuire's previous comment fits number two very well. Any other comments on finding number two? Number three, that the variance request is not one where the specific conditions pertaining to the property are so general or recurrent in nature as to make the formulation of a general regulation for such conditions reasonably practicable.
Yeah,
Unique building with a unique use within unique situation.
Yeah, and yeah, I think so.
and also the applicant has added a covered walkway to mitigate any problems that a property might have if you solely had it on the side.
Well, the new site plan is significantly more pedestrian friendly than the existing site. I mean, I went to the site this afternoon right before coming here just to check it out again, and I was really struck after having studied how much more open and accessible I think the new entrance will be to well, people in cars, but also pedestrians and bikers. Number four, that the authorizing of such a variance will not be a substantial detriment to adjacent property.
Well, a major part of the adjacent property is going away, so that will no longer be a detriment to that house.
No, it will not. Number 5, that authorizing of the variance will not materially impair the purposes of this chapter or the public interest. I think we can also say for number 4, the surrounding properties are also accustomed to this entrance being in this location, so it's not a change. Anyway, number 5, the authorizing of the variance will not materially impair the purposes of this chapter or of the public interest.
They've done everything they can to conform with what the public interest was.
I
which is
think so.
pedestrian.
That the need for the variance is not created by an action of the applicant or previous owner.
This was code sufficient in the earlier times, so, yeah.
And I think they worked diligently to create a site plan that does adhere to the spirit that our new zoning ordinance intends. And I think that is important, that they worked with city staff to create something that looks as if, as our zoning ordinance intends it to look. I think that, I think they did a really nice job with it. So we've gone through our findings of fact. Is there any discussion at this point in time? With no discussion, I will entertain a motion.
Let me try one here. I move to approve case number ZBA 22-03 on behalf of Broadway Family Dentistry for a variance to permit the use of the existing main entrance located in the west elevation of the building as part of an expansion plan for the business at 611 East Broadway Street. I want to add a couple of things there. Parking is already established to service this existing west elevation entrance. The construction must comply with all fire department and DPW stipulations. I think that last part is important since we have this whole list. We want to make sure that all of those then get addressed.
Yes, thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion presented by Vice Chair Orlick, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? The ayes have it. The site plan is approved for a variance. This is the time during the hearing when the floor is opened up to anyone who wishes to come forward and speak. We reserve this time for comments that are not related to a case being presented this evening. Is there anyone on Zoom who has anything to say?
Nobody.
Mr. Kinch, do you have any old business to present?
I have nothing under old business, but I do have a couple under new business. I just want to let the board know we have 2 cases that came in for November. That's November 16th, correct, Laura? So we'll get that packet out to you.
I always like having cases for my birthday.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's why we set the date that way, so. But we'll get those out to you. One deals with a side setback that's part of a lot split, where they're looking for a reduction from 6 feet to 5 feet. The other one is a placement. I had mentioned earlier that it's placement of a new residence on a corner lot. And so we'll be looking at the 2 of those.
Okay. Do we have any other business?
Nothing to report.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Support.
All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. The October 26, 2022 City of Mount Pleasant Zoning Board of Appeals is now adjourned.